And now I'm maybe only like 2 or 3 feet away from it, and I'm looking right at it, and now it's not a mouse, and it's not a spider. It's a tiny little 20-sided die. So, once again, you found yourself at the campsite of the Orator. Please pull up a chair. As you can see, my fire is stoked, which means tonight I have a very special tale to tell. It is a personal, scary story. But before we begin, if you do find yourself enjoying this kind of content, first-hand accounts of the true supernatural and paranormal things that go bump in the night, then allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, and it allows me to continue to do what I love, which is telling terrifying tales. Second, of course, all of my stories are first-hand accounts of the supernatural paranormal. So if you or anybody you know has a story that might fit well on our channel, you can either reach out in the comments below or on any of my social media, and we will find a time to get together, collect your story, and hopefully feature it one day here on The Orator. And lastly, we are rapidly closing in on 500 subscribers. When we hit 500, I am going to be doing a giveaway. I'm looking at some trading cards that I still have. I have a merch store that I'm looking at opening up. There are a couple different things, a couple irons in the fire that I'm working on. And so as soon as we hit 500 subscribers, I'm going to announce what that giveaway is. And then we're going to go from there. And then the next big jump will be all the way to 1,000. So thank you guys for already having subscribed. If you're not subscribed yet, please do so below. And I'm excited to get on to today's story. This tale is a personal tale that happened to yours truly, and I am going to call this story The Mouse, the Spider, and the Die. So our story takes place in the early 2000s, like 2005, maybe 2004, somewhere around there. I was in high school. At the time, probably like a sophomore is my guess, maybe even a freshman. And so at the time, I was like maybe 16, 17 years old. And I grew up in a very small place in Michigan, kind of mid-Michigan. There's sort of like this area where you have Sterling, Michigan, which is like a tiny village. You have Omer, Michigan, which is technically the smallest city in all of Michigan. And then just to the south, you have Standish, Michigan. It makes kind of this triangle. I grew up in the middle of that triangle, in the middle of the woods, dirt road off of a dirt road, very, very secluded. And when I was in high school, I kind of made this really weird transition from being sort of like a sports guy where I played baseball and basketball and I did wrestling and all these other things to I met this group of people on my school bus to school before I got a license and everything like that. And I kind of went in a very nerdy direction, which is why a lot of times you'll see me like anime outfits on here and stuff like that. I got big into anime, Magic the Gathering, and more importantly, Dungeons and Dragons. I was really big into Dungeons and Dragons. Now, if you've never played Dungeons and Dragons before, or if you've just heard the term and you're not super familiar with it, basically the concept is you get a group of people together. One person is what's called the Dungeon Master, and they kind of create the adventure and all of the non-player characters, anybody you're going to run into on your campaign, they create all of that. And then you have the player characters, who are everybody else, and they basically create a character, and then they use that character to enter the world that the Dungeon Master has created. And you basically just role play out a scenario, something like you walk into a bar, there are all these goblins there, they look angry at you, what are you going to do? And then you as the player character get to decide what you're going to do. And so I got really into that kind of stuff in high school, and I was with a group of friends that I'm still friends with today, and we called ourselves The Circle because we were like one united team that never broke apart. And we were unending. That was kind of the idea behind the name. And you know, as the Circle, we would play Dungeons and Dragons in one of two locations pretty much exclusively. The first one was a place we called the 50. And the 50 was this really cool place because it was this tiny cabin on 50 acres of woods, which is why it was called the 50 because it sat on 50 acres. And it was just like removed from all of society. This thing was way back in the woods. It had one light in the cabin, and then there was like, I think, a set of bunk beds, and then one other bed, and then I think a couch. And we all, when we went to play D&D there, we would do it only on the weekends, and we would go stay there all weekend. And the thing had like an outhouse, not like even a real bathroom. It had an outhouse. It was crazy, and that was a lot of fun. But the other place we played Dungeons and Dragons throughout the week was at my friend Damien's house. And Damien's house was, the city of Stanish. If you went outside of that city and you went west outside of the city until basically you were surrounded completely by farmland, cornfields and cows grazing and stuff like that. If you were out in that area, you were getting pretty close, and then you had to make a couple of turns off of even more dirt roads, and at some point you would end up at my friend Damien's house. So when you pull in and you look at this house, it's 2 stories, an unfinished basement, and it sits on a pretty sizable yard. It's got a barn all the way in back, and that barn was like completely unusable, and there's a bunch of crap in it. It was really dangerous, so no one ever went in there. And then everything else around the yard was just a bunch of grass and stuff like that. And then if you look beyond in any direction, it was all fields, like cornfields and stuff like that for farming. So there were really no houses around it, except right next door there was a trailer that Damien's brother Wesley lived in with his family. And then Damien lived with his eldest brother Gary, who was like, 15 years older than all of us, and had lived there for a really long time. And one day on this channel, I want to tell the story that man lived through, because he lived in that house a long time, and he has a laundry list of crazy stuff that happened to him. And one day I do want to share that, but this is not that story. This is the story of what happened to me in that house. So when you first enter the house, the first thing that's crazy about the house is you could feel how haunted this house is just when you walked in. It was like this strange, dark, oppressive weight that just sat on you the moment you entered the house. And so you walk in the front door, and you're kind of on like this enclosed porch area that it didn't really seem like anybody ever used. We certainly never used it. I never really saw anybody sitting out there. And then if you went beyond that to the second door, which is like really the front door to their actual house, you are entering the kitchen. And one of the weird things about this house, there were many, one of the weird things about this house was every room was painted a different color. And they were drastic, bright, weird colors. You'd have a blue room, a yellow room, a green room, where all the walls were painted that color. And then, of course, the infamous red room, which I will get to in a little bit. So you enter the kitchen, and I don't even remember what color it is because it's been so long, but it was a weirdly colored kitchen. And this house was so old that when you turn on water and drank from it, it was not like city water. This was definitely well water, and you could taste the iron in this water. And so this is a very, 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 very old house. In fact, the house was so old, there's no official record of exactly when it was built, but they have a ton of family history at this house, and there was all sorts of really weird stuff. Their family had lived there for generations and generations, and a long time ago, like back in like colonial-ish times, when this stuff was just getting built, they would actually hold funerals in this specific house. They know the room, the actual living room area, is when they would hold funerals. So even if people didn't necessarily die in that house, a lot of dead bodies were in that house at some point or another. And so you enter the kitchen, and if you were to keep going straight out of the kitchen, you would go through this door on your left, and it would take you down into the basement. I'm going to get to the basement in a minute because it's like the creepiest thing, that basement. But if you were to turn right, you could go through a door like straight ahead to your right that I think took you into like a bedroom, and then you could go directly right. And if you went directly right, you would exit that room and enter what's called the red room. And the red room was named as such because the whole room was red. The carpet was red, all the walls were painted red, everything like that. And there was a lot of paranormal activity in that area specifically all the time. It's where a lot of family members saw stuff or got pushed by something, or all sorts of stuff happened in the red room, and so it was really creepy. And then if you kept walking beyond the red room, you'd enter the living room, and it was like this big archway, this old school archway, and it had these big doors that kind of came in on a track and closed this way, which were pretty much always open. And so you could enter the living room, and they had, a couch and a TV there. But if you went back into the red room, there were stairs in the red room that went upstairs, and that's where all of the main bedrooms were upstairs. And so if you went upstairs, it was literally just one hallway end to end, and I think there was 3 or maybe 4 bedrooms upstairs. And we normally played Dungeons & Dragons down in the basement, because there were other people living in the house. And so we didn't want to be disturbing, especially because we were there pretty often, 2-3 times a week, and we would get very loud and boisterous, and there's a bunch of us, and so we did it down in the basement. So you go down to the basement, and as soon as you head down, you go down some stairs, you hit a flight, and then you have to come around and head back kind of the way you came downstairs. And as soon as you get down to the bottom of the basement, and you look right in front of you, there was a toilet that was just out in the open. It was kind of up on this platform, and I believe it worked. And then if you went beyond the whole toilet, there was like a hallway that kind of extended down a little bit. Nobody used that toilet, obviously, and nobody really used that hallway. But if you turn and you were to your right, you'd be out in kind of like the main area of the basement, and it was just a big square, and it had paved cement floors, and all of the walls were brick. And you're just in a big room that they used for storage and stuff like that. If you went beyond that room, you'd be in a second room that was pretty similar, big square room. And then I believe to the left, they had a door that entered that hallway, but I don't think we ever really opened that door or went into it. And then there were 2 rooms you could go to, one on your right straight in front of you and one on your left straight in front of you. The one on your right, if you went into that one, it was like this tiny little area, a tiny little room where it had like shelves with tons of jars, like glass jars. And then if you went straight ahead, you would be in the D&D room, which was a big square room, same thing, except for that wall that butted up against the room with the jars was actually cabinets, these big, tall cabinets with tons of drawers, and that's where we kept all of our weapons, because on top of being Dungeons & Dragons people, we were also weapons collectors. So one of the reasons we would play down there is whatever character we were, we would go find a weapon of that character and kind of have it with us just as sort of a visual representation. And that's where we spent most of our time, is down in the basement. And there was always activity down in that basement. You'd always hear stuff moving around or hear voices and stuff like that. You'd hear people walking upstairs all the time, and you just try to attribute that to the fact that there are other people living in the house, but sometimes you'd hear it and there weren't even people there. You'd see shadows out of the corner of your eyes. Like I said, there was that oppressive feeling constantly while you were in that house. So there's lots of stuff that happened down in that basement. But the time that I experienced something supernatural in that house that I can't possibly explain, that I know exactly what happened, had nothing to do with the basement, surprisingly. That's one of the reasons I think this was so weird, was because when this happened, I was sort of in a state of mind where I wasn't expecting anything to happen. It wasn't like it was late at night and it was already kind of spooky and I thought I saw something. This is not like that at all. So it's the middle of the day, and I'm guessing we must have just gotten off school and come straight to Damien's house to play some Dungeons & Dragons. And so we're talking like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And for whatever reason, maybe the basement was already being used for something, or maybe there was nobody in the house, but for some reason we decided to play Dungeons & Dragons in the living room instead of playing it downstairs. And so we're all set up in the living room, either on a couch or just sitting on the ground, or some maybe pulled in a chair or something like that, and we're sitting in a circle and we're playing Dungeons & Dragons. And at some point, somebody needs what's called the player's handbook, which is basically like a big, thick book with all of the rules of Dungeons & Dragons. And there's a couple different versions of these kind of things. You have the Dungeon Master's Guide, which teaches the Dungeon Master how to do everything. And then there's the Player's Handbook, which is like all the stuff for specifically the players. And so somebody needed one of those books, and Damien said, oh, it's upstairs in my room. And I was going to be the one to run up and grab it. And so I go out of the living room into the red room, and then I head up these stairs, which is like a tiny set of stairs, and then a flight, and then you turn right, and it goes all the way up. And then Damien's room, if you turn left, was all the way down the hallway. Where the hallway ended was his door, opened up into his bedroom. And again, it's the middle of the day, so I'm not scared or spooked out by the house. I'm not thinking about the fact that the house is haunted. We come to this house 3 or 4 times a week at least. I stay the night there all the time. Like, this is like a home away from home. That's how comfortable I am here, even though there's activity in the house. But I'm not in any sort of like mental state to be subjective to that stuff, if that makes sense. So I run upstairs, and I'm trying to be quick because, we have limited time to play, and I don't want this to be the reason that we lose out on a bunch of time. So I run through his door, I open it up, run through, and as soon as you enter his door, pretty straightforward. It's a big rectangular room, and he's got up and to the left is his TV, and then he's got his bed basically opposite the TV so he can lay down and watch TV. And then all the way across the room by his bed and the TV, there's the one window of the room that looks outside. And the player's handbook was on, I think, a bookshelf next to his TV was the idea. And so I start to head over there to look through all of his books and find which one is the right one. And as I'm walking over to that bookshelf, I see on his windowsill, he's got like one of these old school windowsills with this big metal, wooden platform that like kind of juts out that you can set something on, like a cup might be big enough to set on it, something like that. I see this giant like mouse or maybe small rat run across from one side of the that shelving to the other on the windowsill. And I didn't think anything weird about it supernaturally. It's just this is an old house, and obviously set out mouse traps and stuff like that. You're going to catch a mouse. It's set in a field and all that kind of stuff. It's not like it was uncommon to see a mouse in this house. And so I saw this thing run all the way across the windowsill, and I'm like, well, crap, I can't just let it go. You know what I mean? I don't know what I'm going to do, how I'm going to catch it or what I'm going to do, but I'm not just going to let it run around in the house. And so I start inching closer to this windowsill, and it's like maybe the whole room all the way across is 10 feet or something like that. And it's the middle of the day. I'm seeing very clearly. But as I'm getting closer to this rat or this mouse or whatever, it's like, I don't know exactly how to explain this, but it's almost like it shrunk. And then what I was looking at was not a mouse or a rat at all. It was like a big, hairy spider. And at this point, I'm probably still like 7 feet away, maybe 8 feet away. So I've only taken a couple steps into the room, but still clear as day, there's a spider. And if you've ever like trapped a spider and it's sort of in a corner, you know how it does that thing where it sort of like is like this, does this kind of like nervous darting back and forth, almost like as the human, you're worried it's going to like attack, it's kind of in that mode. That's what it was doing. I'm watching, and it's like it was looking at me, watching me come closer, and as I'm coming closer, it's doing that like moving, and I'm like, I would rather personally deal with the mouse than the spider, but I'm pretty creeped out. And then part of me is thinking, how did this thing just transform? And the other part is thinking it could not have been a spider because of how fast it ran across the windowsill and how big it was, and now it's much smaller than it was, and it was a brown mouse, and now it's a tiny black spider, and the whole thing did not make any sense to me, but I'm sort of in the moment, and I'm like, well, if it's a spider, that's a much easier thing to capture and release outside than a mouse would be. And so I keep inching closer, kind of thinking, all right, let me get the lay of the land here, and then when I get closer, maybe I can find something to capture it in. And as I'm approaching, and now I'm maybe only like 2 or 3 feet away from it, and I'm looking right at it, and now it's not a mouse, and it's not a spider. It's a tiny little 20-sided die. And it's just sitting there on the windowsill. Not moving, not doing anything at all. And in my head, I'm still not at paranormal supernatural yet. I'm trying to process exactly what happened because this thing, I watched it go for sure from one side of the windowsill to the other. And when it started, it was so big. It was like I said, like not like a tiny little mouse. It was like, I thought like a rat. It was that big. And then somehow it's this tiny little 20-sided die on the complete opposite side of this window. And then it starts to like hit me like, okay, what you just witnessed could not have happened possibly. And so really quick, I go and I grab the book still because that's why I came up here. And then I just head downstairs and I'm like, whew, I tell them this is what happened. And everybody's like, yeah, okay. Like this is the house. This happens. This kind of stuff happens all the time. And it just like, it kind of didn't faze anybody because of how much activity happened in that house. Now I want to fast forward a bunch of time because like I said, people lived in that house for a long time. Everybody has stories. One day I want to get a lot of those stories in. But here's kind of like an update on why this is so crazy to me, this whole house and all the history behind it. So maybe in 2017, my previous employment was I used to do life insurance. I help people purchase life insurance and walk them through the different types and how that stuff works. And I was actually visiting back at that house. Gary and Damien had moved out of it, and then their brother, Wesley, who used to live next door, he had now had a bigger family, I think 4 kids and his wife, and so they bought and moved into that house. So it's been in that family's lineage forever, basically. And so, I called to set up an appointment, And he said, well, I actually live in the house Damien used to live in. I didn't even really follow up with this guy, Wesley, very much. So I didn't even know that he had moved into this house. I was just trying to set an appointment to do my job. And so he's like, oh, yeah, I'm at Damien's old house. Here's the day. You can pop by, whatever. So I head up to my old stomping grounds, and I head out to the house, and I pull up. And it was like I was hit with like a wave of nostalgia, right? Because I haven't been in this house in over a decade. Or very close to it at least, and here it is, man, like the haunted house. And so I walk up and I enter the inside kind of enclosed porch, and I knock on the door, and I enter the house, and I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it was like the heaviness, the weight of the house was completely gone. They had also like repainted and made the house look nice, and updated it, but it was nothing about that. I had only entered the kitchen, and the second I entered it, it just felt like this place of like peace and comfort. And it was not like it was neutral, it was just such a weird feeling. And so I go in and I sit down, and I don't really say anything because, like I said, I'm not super close with Wes and his family. I know them, but it's not like I hung out with them as much as I did with Damien in high school. And so I go and I sit down and I kind of give my presentation. I talk to him about life insurance and stuff like that. And we're kind of wrapping up the meeting. And I just said, hey, I know this is kind of a weird thing to say. I said, but that I basically, was in this house all the time and stuff like that. And the history of the house. And I experienced stuff, and everybody did. I said, back then this house had this crazy weight to it. And you could just feel when you walked in the oppression and anger and hate and evil in this house. I said, I don't know if maybe it's just because I'm older, or maybe it's just because you repainted, or I don't know, maybe it's any of those things. But when I walked in today, I didn't feel that at all. I felt like the house was very light and happy and a source of good, positive energy. And Wes said, well, it's interesting that you say that, because when we first moved in, we started, experiencing all the stuff that we've experienced forever. And he said, we didn't want to talk to our kids very much about it because we didn't want to scare them, but they started experiencing stuff and saying stuff. He said, so we had, some priests from our church come out, and they blessed the house like from the bottom of the foundation all the way to the top. He said every single room they went in, he said they probably spent half the day here cleansing the entire house. And he said, and since they finished cleansing the house and left, he said, we haven't had a single piece of activity. We haven't seen anything, heard anything. The kids are sleeping better. Everybody's back normal. He said, it's like this house is a completely different place. And he said, since then, I felt the exact same way. And it just like kind of blew my mind that, as soon as I walked in, I experienced this feeling, and there's a very specific reason to it. So a lot of times people ask me, why do I tell scary stories? Where did all this come from? There are a couple experiences I've had in my life. Go check out the Witchy Wolf experience. It's the very first story I ever told on here. But man, I would say this house contributed to my love of the supernatural and paranormal, my belief in the paranormal, better than almost anything else that I've experienced. And so it was really wild to experience that, and luckily the house is cleansed now, so they don't ever have to experience that stuff again. And so I hope you appreciated today's story. I know this is a little bit different than my normal format, but I wanted you guys to experience this one with me. And so that's going to do it for today's story. If you did enjoy this story or any of my others, and you love this kind of content, first-hand accounts of the true supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell, so you get notified every time I upload new content. And it allows me to continue to do what I love, which is telling terrifying tales. And, of course, all of my stories are first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. So if you or anybody you know has an experience that might tell well as a story on my channel, either reach out in the comments below on any of my social media. We can find a time to get together, collect your story, and hopefully feature it one day here on The Orator. And so, until next time, where you'll pull up your chair, my fire will be stoked, and I will have another tale to tell.